one word which my co-host has brought up frequently is cult, and I think even in the documentary they don't really speak in those terms, but there is something about it which is very cult-like, the fact that there's one person who is at the top, you could say, who's giving the instructions of what ought they should do. And what the documentary also goes into is actually the reason why they might have followed all those instructions and stayed mum about it, not spoken to anybody else about it outside the family, is that they were actually doing well, listening to those
Yeah.
instructions. Like their business was going great. Everyone got educated in the family, and had good job positions, and one of them was just going to get married, you
Yeah.
know and she had an engagement, in fact, that week itself, and the curious thing is no one knew what was happening, you know
Mhm.
so it is kind of like a cult in that sense, right? Even though it is a family, it's kind of like a cult situation where one person is telling what you ought to do, and there are people who staunchly believe it. At least that's what we presume. Of course, there's a great mystery in it. No one really knows what they were going through, but and what makes me think, though, that it's so much of a cult is there was a video footage in the documentary itself of them a night before, carrying all the necessary items, such as a stool which would be required,
Yeah.
and all of them seemed calm. Like there was one footage where you could see the 13-year-old kid and I think the mother, they were carrying the stools and they didn't seem frazzled or forced. They were just going about it normally. In fact, to me, I'd read a theory somewhere that this may have not been a first attempt. Of course, this is not proven, and there's no evidence of it. It's just someone who has, I read someone say on the internet, that this might not have been their first attempt
Oh,
at doing something because
that's
they seem so calm
interesting.
in that, in that footage,
Hmm. So you presume that there would be a possibility where they have performed this ritual before?
I don't know, but to me it is striking that they were so calm about this whole thing. Of the little footage we have of them, they were very calm about it.
And yeah, I mean, it really tells you a lot about how simple bias could actually, you know, lead to so much of misinterpretation. And I think most cults around the world, like, I don't know what identifies as a cult, but a lot of these cults would, how they're formed. Like, it's not just that they're doing a ritual. Like it would seem strange to a third person to think, why is someone doing a ritual like this when it's not benefiting them. But so as you mentioned, like they were doing well as a family, right? So suppose a cult leader tells them to do something and they get an immediate benefit out of it.
In
And
this case, their business was doing really well. They really took off in those 11 years financially.
yeah, and once that happens, you are bound to then keep following the leader and keep following the leader until the point where you don't even question the leader.
Yeah.
That's why like a lot of these cults, like even it brings me to the guy Once Upon a Time in Hollywood guy,
Charles Manson,
yeah,
right?
Charles Manson. you know uh, so he had a bunch of hippies, and like when the hippies accepted him as the leader, they had a roof to live under, they had better food, they had
Right.
better people, at least people around them who they could connect to. So just that would just the fact that they had a better house, they had better privileges, would lead would lead them to keep following
Hmm.
Charles Manson. It's a simple reward system, or simple conditioning, as they call it in psychology.
Yeah, and there's another component to it. Just to stick to Manson for a moment, like for there's a component to cults where there is also larger mythos, which there's a belief system which everyone in that cult believes, and almost all of it involves something ultimate good which would come, if they would follow this. So in case of Manson said, listening to Beatles White Album, that there are some secret messages about a holy war which would come about, and which they would partake in as the good guys, waging the war against the bad guys. So there is these narratives, and I can't help but also connect that component to our case here in House of Secrets, where they believed that this last ritual, they didn't believe that they are going to die. In fact, they believed that they would, the grandfather who's speaking through, as said by Lalit, is speaking through him, is would ultimately come and save all of them. So it's ultimately a narrative about hope, right, in a way which is very characteristic of cults.
Yeah, I mean, all of that actually is very fascinating because, so to all our viewers, I am a psychology graduate, so I hold a key interest, like it's a key interest for me, psychology. And what you're talking about basically seems like this terminology that we use, it's called destructive obedience. So, I'll just tell you guys about the Stanley Milgram experiment. So basically, Stanley Milgram dressed up as a lab professor. So he put on a white coat, he put on, like, he had papers, he had a goggle, all of that. And he told people that, like, there was a student and there was a teacher. Obviously, the student was the actor. The student was tied up on an electrical chair, and the participant was told that whenever the student gives a wrong answer, you have to give him a shock. And the shock started off at a very low voltage and increased to potentially life risking levels of electricity. So yeah, basically it is a whole full-fledged experiment, but I'll get to the crux of it, which was that when Stanley Milgram got in the participants who were to give the shocks, the participants were more likely to give the shocks when he wore that lab coat, when he wore that goggle, like the mythos that you're talking about. So something as simple as a lab coat would influence the participants to give potential, like, high levels of shocks. Now, obviously, the shocks were fake and all of this was an act. But you could see how simple mannerisms, simple dressing sense would influence a person's ability to make a decision. And all rationality gets lost when that mythos is present.
Yeah, this is a very interesting point. Like what you bring out here is that there's a larger narrative, there's a larger mythos which governs a cult. In this case, what do you call it? Cult family. That's the interesting question. But what also governs it is the role, of the leader. In every cult there's a leader. So in that experiment, the Milgram experiment, the role is of a doctor, right? When you're wearing a lab coat, you're a scientist or a doctor.
Yeah.
So that gives a sense of authority. And I think even in the House of Secrets documentary, in that case, there is an authoritative figure's voice, which is the grandfather's voice being spoken through Lalit, right? And the interesting thing is Lalit is not the eldest child of the family. He's the younger one. So you wouldn't think he would be the one holding the authority, right? But he is speaking through the grandfather who was the patriarch of the family who just passed away. So in a way he's donning a coat, a role which gives him the authority to build this mythos. Of course, none of this may be conscious, it's over time it comes about. But I think what's to note is that in all of these similar situations, there is someone who holds the authority and who is driving the narrative.